Okay, let's get right into it. This is one of those true crime stories that, well, it's just so much more than a manhunt. We're talking about a pivotal moment in history where a brand new scientific discovery didn't just catch a killer, but, and this is the incredible part, it also saved an innocent man from spending his life in prison for the very first time. So, let's set the scene. We're in Leicestershire, England, back in the mid-1980s. Picture this quiet, ordinary community just completely gripped by fear. And why? Because two teenage girls have been murdered. The way they were attacked, it's chillingly similar. The police know, they just know they're hunting for a serial killer.
So, how do you catch a ghost? I mean, that's literally the problem the investigators were up against. This killer was a phantom. He didn't live behind the usual stuff. No fingerprints, no witnesses, nothing. The police were totally stumped, and you can just imagine the pressure building up.
All right, let's get into the details. It all starts here, with the brutal crimes against two young women, Linda Mann and Dawn Ashworth. And these events, they would end up sparking a complete revolution in how we solve crimes.
So first, back in November of '83, a 15-year-old named Linda Mann is tragically found murdered. The case just goes completely cold. Then, almost 3 years pass, and in July of '86, it happens again. Another 15-year-old, Dawn Ashworth, is killed in pretty much the exact same way, just in the next village over. The whole community was absolutely terrified. They were convinced a monster was living right there, among them.
So the investigation is going nowhere, it seems hopeless. And then, boom, the police get a breakthrough. They arrest this local 17-year-old kid, a kitchen porter named Richard Buckland. Now, he had some learning difficulties, and after a lot of questioning, he actually confesses to Dawn Ashworth's murder. For the police, this must have felt like, finally, case closed, right? The nightmare is over.
But this is where the story takes this completely unexpected, fascinating turn. Because while the police are zeroed in on Buckland, totally separate from all this, a scientist at the University of Leicester had just stumbled upon something groundbreaking. A brand new technique that nobody had ever even thought of using in a police investigation.
Yeah, so back in 1984, this scientist, Sir Alec Jeffreys, he develops this thing he calls DNA fingerprinting. The basic idea is that you can create a profile from someone's DNA that is as unique as, well, a fingerprint. It was a brilliant idea for sure, but at the time, it was just for science, purely academic. Catching criminals with it, that was even on the radar.
So the police have Buckland's confession for one murder, but they really want to tie him to both. They hear about this new DNA thing and think, hey, why not give it a shot? So they send samples from both crime scenes, along with a blood sample from Buckland, over to Jeffrey's lab. And everyone, I mean everyone, is expecting this to be the final nail in the coffin to prove he did it. But the result that came back, it was a complete shock. Buckland's DNA was not a match.
And you have to understand, this wasn't just some lab test that went wrong. This was a historic moment. For the very first time in history, DNA evidence had just stopped a huge miscarriage of justice in its tracks. Richard Buckland was completely cleared. The police were right back to square one, but this time they had something they'd never had before: the killer's actual genetic fingerprint.
So now the police have this whole new kind of problem. I mean, it's great they have the killer's DNA profile, but what do you do with it? It's just a pattern on a piece of paper. There were no DNA databases back then, so they couldn't just run it through a computer. It's like having a key, but you have no idea which door it opens.
So what did they do? They launched this absolutely massive, never-before-seen operation. They decided they were going to go out and try to test the DNA of over 5,000 men in the area.
I'm not kidding. They sent out letters to every single man in the area between 17 and 34, asking them to please, voluntarily, come in and give a blood and saliva sample. They called it a DNA dragnet. It was this huge gamble, right? They were just betting that the killer was a local guy and that he'd be dumb enough, or maybe scared enough, to just walk right into their trap.
So months go by, they're testing thousands and thousands of samples. And the result? Nothing. Not a single match. The police must have been tearing their hair out. What happened? Did the killer move away? Did he just not show up? How on earth did he manage to slip through this massive genetic net?
And you know how the case finally broke? It wasn't some brilliant piece of detective work. It was a dumb, simple mistake. Turns out, the real killer was a local baker named Colin Pitchfork. He totally panicked about the DNA test and got a coworker to go in and take it for him. The problem? His buddy couldn't keep his mouth shut. He's overheard in a pub bragging about what he did. Someone hears him, tips off the police, and that was it. They arrest Pitchfork, Test his DNA, and it's a perfect match. They finally had their guy.
So, catching Colin Pitchfork wasn't just about closing one case. No, it was so much bigger than that. It was really the beginning of a whole new era for criminal justice.
So if you look at the whole timeline, this thing stretched out over 5 years, from that first murder in '83 all the way to Pitchfork's conviction in '88. But those key moments, the exoneration in '86 and the arrest in '87, they were all thanks to this brand new DNA tech. It completely drove the investigation.
It's just incredible when you think about the legacy of this one case. It literally gave us 2 world firsts all at once. You have Richard Buckland, the very first person in history to be proven innocent by DNA, and then you have Colin Pitchfork, the very first murderer to be convicted by it. It proved both sides of the coin. After this, forensic science was changed forever. I love this quote from the inventor himself, Sir Alec Jeffreys. It's such an important point. He said, "It does not solve crimes. It establishes whether sample X comes from person Y." And that's it, right? DNA isn't some magic wand. It's just a tool, a really powerful and impartial one. All it does is say, yes, this sample matches this person, or no, it doesn't. It's up to the justice system to figure out what that means.
And I think that's what makes this story so powerful. You know, it just goes to show how one single breakthrough, happening in a quiet university lab, can completely change our entire idea of evidence, of truth, of justice. It really makes you wonder, what's the next big discovery out there that's going to change everything all over again?